Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I'm Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom Moore. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, we are back again, and in a very good piece of news for Ohio State, so is Jermaine Mathews.
Germaine Matthews, starting corner, coming back for a senior season, starting every game this past season, and being a energy giver, not an energy taker, as Urban Meyer likes to reference players. 26 tackles, tackle and a half for loss, a sack, 3 passes broken up, 1 forced fumble, 2 interceptions. A guy that has the versatility to play inside and out. We were wondering for the longest time, are they going to bring in a corner out of the portal and maybe move Jermaine Mathews inside, because we know he can do that. That's not how they went. They brought in a Earl Little, presumably, and a safety to play inside, meaning Jermaine Mathews is good to go on the outside. And he's a guy that, I know there's going to be some comments talking about the catches that he gave up this year. What I would say on those is he was right there. And I think that's all you can really ask for of your corners, to be right there. And again, this is a good news thing for the Buckeyes to bring back a returning starter, a guy who will eventually be playing in the NFL, a guy that has seen it all, has done it all, gets to practice against outstanding receivers at Ohio State every day. And so the games are a little bit easier compared to some of the guys he's going against. Very good news for the Buckeyes, adding in one of what will be one of the top corners in the nation this year, this coming year, in Jermaine Mathews.
Well, how many tackles did you say he had? 26 tackles? I mean, if you have 26 tackles and you assume some of those are in run support and some of those you're probably playing zone and you're bringing someone down, that's not that many completions on you over the course of the season, because there were not I can't off the top of my head remember a lot of guys running past him and getting long completions where someone else picked up the tackle. He was really good. And yeah, guess what? Indiana got him at one point, and Miami got him at one point. Guess what? Those two teams are playing for the national championship. They've gotten a lot of people this year. That's, you're not, you would go long periods of, it felt like there were weeks during the season where I really didn't have any action shots of Jermaine Mathews because the ball was simply not going to his side of the field. He was just sort of taking people away. And that's what you want out of a corner. He is solid in run support. He's a good coverage guy. He's a really good veteran presence. I mean, and every time we talk to people around the team about him, everyone talks about his energy, his enthusiasm, his attitude, all the stuff, all the sort of soft factor stuff that you really want. But the on-field stuff is exactly what you want as well. I go back to, corner is a spot where it's really hard. That's a really unfair position in a lot of ways, where this time last year, what was everyone saying about Davis Nickmanosin? Oh, this guy's terrible. He gets penalties every 5 minutes. You can't trust him. And then now, coming out of this season, it's they lost Davis Nickmanosin. How could they possibly replace Davis Nickmanosin? No one can live up to the standard. And then, a year ago with Denzel Burke, and Denzel Burke had a bad day at Oregon. And guess what? Denzel Burke had a real good season other than the bad day at Oregon, but everyone wants to talk about the bad day at Oregon. And it's like, the standard is not perfection. The standard is, are you a really good, consistent player who they can rely on? And because no one can live up to perfection as the standard, but he has lived up to the standard for years for Ohio State. I would have no concerns about him coming in as the number one corner, and Devin Sanchez in year 2 sort of being across the field from him. And then the three safeties, McLean, and then the 2 guys that they brought in through the transfer portal. That's a really solid, starting 5 in your secondary. And this is one where if you didn't bring Jermaine Mathews back, then you've got all sorts of questions, because they lost Bryce West, they lost Aaron Scott to the portal. So then if you lost Jermaine Mathews, then you've got to dive into the portal and find someone to replace him, which is not easy and is certainly not going to be cheap. And, if I go back to the when Michigan had their head coaching position open, you had the question was sort of, if Michigan opened, how many candidates would you go through before you got to Sherrone Moore? And the answer was a lot. If the Michigan job was on the board, they'd be one of the most appealing in the nation. if Jermaine Mathews was in the portal, he would be one of the most sought after players in the portal. I don't know where he'd fall in the portal rankings, but I bet he'd be a top 2 or 3 corner. So now, instead of Ohio State having to go into the portal and find a top 2 or 3 corner, they have one, and they already know who he is, and they already know what kind of a player he is, and they already know what kind of a practice player he is, and they already know how he fits in the locker room. All of, this is one of those things where he's not shiny and new. He's familiar and returning, but shiny and new is always very exciting, and everyone's get all fired up over shiny and new. But man, oh man, someone who they know they can rely on, that is the really solid foundation you build a really good defense on.
Yeah, I remember Nebraska fans being excited about shiny and new Tyreek Johnson transferring over from Ohio State, former 5-star, and then not turning out well for him and wondering why doesn't he play. With Germaine Matthews, this past year was his first year starting, but he's been in the lineup since he was a true freshman. So this is a guy very experienced, going to be a true senior, second year starting, seen it all. We've discussed in previous shows like how maintaining the culture is getting more and more difficult. This is a guy, he's a locker room guy. Everybody loves him. He keeps that locker room light but also locked in when it needs to be. And that's a guy that you can rely on and you can trust. He's always been professional, even though it's like he's the guy with the biggest smile. He's the happiest guy. And you can say the same thing about Brandon Innes. Like, these are the happiest guys, but they're also professional and they take all of this very seriously. And go back to Jermaine Mathews at camp as a high schooler, earning his offer, just being put through the ringer by Jim Knowles and I think Ryan Day as well, just working him, and he never backed down, and that's what you want from your corner, and that's what they've been getting from him, and that's what they'll get from him. One more year, and you alluded to it earlier, if you didn't have him, I want people to know that if there was no Jermaine Mathews on this team coming up, you'd have to go get somebody. Who knows who you're going to get at this point, and it wouldn't be as good as Jermaine Mathews. And when you look at the rest of the roster, we know Devin Sanchez is going to be the other guy, but you got Miles Lockhart at this point, Jordan Woods at this point, Jay Timmons, Jordan Thomas as your top 2 freshmen. And I keep expecting those 2 guys, Jay Timmons and Jordan Thomas, to be involved in the 2 deep this in 2026. And if you don't have Jermaine Mathews, boy, that's a thin room. And it's already kind of thin with your 2 starters known, but it's a lot better knowing 2 of your starters than knowing just one, and that one being a true sophomore who had some growing pains this past year.
For sure. I think you saw what a realistic sort of best-ish case scenario for a true freshman corner is for Devin, with Devin Sanchez last year, where he's out there in meaningful minutes in week 1 against number 1 Texas. That is really out of the ordinary for a secondary that's really good. Denzel Burke was out there in a secondary in 2021 for, as a day 1 starter in the secondary. And I think as we found out later, that said a lot about Denzel Burke, but that also said a lot about the 2021 Ohio State secondary. Devin Sanchez was, as good or better, I would guess, than Denzel Burke was in 2021. But he was surrounded by better players, so he wasn't thrown into that role right away. And as you said, they still had growing pains, but that's what you'd like your true freshman. If you've got, 1 or 2 of those true freshman corners who's ready for some game action, that's the kind of role you want them in, where it's, a little bit here. You don't want to have to be out there for 12 plays in a row on a drive. You want to be able to, you go in, come out. There's going to be a lot of teaching. There's going to be a lot of learning. That's okay. This just keeps you from having to throw those guys into a day 1 starter thing if they're not ready for it. And go back over the years, think about some of the highest drafted Ohio State corners that there've been. Jeff Okudah. When Jeff Okudah was a true freshman, I think his first career start came in the Cotton Bowl against USC, and that was a game where Denzel Webb, right? No, not Webb. Denzel.
Damon Webb?
No, Denzel Ward. Denzel Ward. Too many defensive backs over the years. Denzel Ward opted out in that Cotton Bowl against USC, and Jeff Okudah got kind of thrown in there. And that was a game where the Ohio State pass rush just completely ate the USC offensive line alive. And Jeff Okudah played, okay, but that was Jeff Okudah, who would go on to be a top, 5 NFL draft pick. And that was the 13th game of the season. So, it takes a while for these guys to sort of get up to game speed, no matter how talented they are. So, having another proven veteran back to sort of lead that room, to have Devin Sanchez be able to be the other corner starter and not have to necessarily take on the, wide receiver one for the other team every single game on every single snap. That's really helpful. Yeah, this is just all around really, really good news for Ohio State.
Yep, it's certainly better than the alternative for sure. Good news, bring back another starter. You can continue to do that. In this day and age, you should appreciate it. So there you go. Germaine Matthews is back. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit the thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell to be notified. All those good things. And, of course, you can continue to find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you all later.